"Eleanor, darling, I'll handle the RSVP." I just stood there, watching my daughter-in-law, Chloe, at my desk. The desk my husband Arthur and I had planned our entire life's work on. She held the invitation to my foundation's annual gala with a sigh, as if the burden was all hers. "This level of event planning," she said, giving me that soft, pitying smile. "It's just so complex now. You've done so much. It's time for you to just relax and let Thomas and me take the lead. You've earned a rest." Complex. I'd been running that gala for 20 years. Earned a rest. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like she was gently escorting me to a nursing home. But that explosion was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. To understand how we reached that breaking point, we need to go back. Back to when their help first started to feel like a hostile takeover. That takeover didn't happen overnight. It was 1,000 tiny, polite invasions, each one disguised as help. It started, funnily enough, with the guest house. When my son, Thomas, and his wife, Chloe, got married 5 years ago, it seemed perfectly logical. The guest house on the Vance estate was beautiful, a stunning 3-bedroom modern build that my late husband, Arthur, had designed for visiting artists. It had its own pool, its own gate, its own identity. "It's just until we get on our feet, Mom," Thomas had said. He had his father's kind eyes, but not his fire. "Just to build up some savings so we can buy our own place. A year. 2, tops." I was happy to have them close. I really was. Arthur had been gone for a decade, and the main house, with its echoing hallways and preserved rooms, felt vast. The sound of their life, the distant music from their pool, the headlights sweeping across my lawn at night, it made the estate feel less like a museum and more like a home. 2 years turned into 3. 3 turned into 5. Their savings never seemed to materialize. Then came the art advisory business. My son, God love him, has an art history degree from a very expensive private college. He has impeccable taste in 19th century watercolors and a total, almost allergic, inability to hold a 9-to-5 job. He'd tried to open a gallery in the city. It was a beautiful, minimalist space. It was also a financial black hole. It folded in less than a year. The debt was considerable. Chloe was the one who came up with the advisory idea. Chloe with her sharp, perfect bob and her voice that was always a half-octave too sweet. "It's perfect, Eleanor," she'd said, her eyes bright as she explained it to me over lunch. "Thomas knows everyone. He just needs a little seed money to build a client base. It's not a job. It's a lifestyle. It's all about networking." So, I funded it. I paid for the LLC. I funded the business bank account. I became the sole investor in Vance Art Advisory, a company that, as far as I could tell, had no clients, no art, and no showings. I remember walking over to the guest house on a sunny Tuesday morning. It was the 10th of the month, the day I reviewed the foundation's expenses. I always included the art advisory in that stack. It was just easier to categorize it as a charitable donation. The Amex statement for the business was in my leather portfolio. I paused at their front gate. The guest house is all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the warm, old-world brick of the main house. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Chloe on a brand-new Peloton, her back to me. She was laughing, on a video call with a friend, her hand flipping her hair. I pressed the call button. The music cut off. Chloe's voice came over the speaker, bright and breathless. "Eleanor, hi. Just let yourself in, darling. The door's open." I walked into the cool, air-conditioned space. It was spotless, not a single magazine out of place. It looked like a spread in Architectural Digest. Chloe was wiping her face with a towel, all smiles. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "I'm just drowning in calls this morning." "Just the monthly statements, dear," I said, patting my portfolio. I wanted to go over them with Thomas. "Is he available?" "Oh, he's in a massive meeting in his office, a potential client in Zurich. You know how it is. Can I help?" I heard the distinct, tinny sound of video game gunfire coming from the closed office door. I chose to ignore it. "Perhaps you can," I said. I sat at their enormous quartz kitchen island. It was so white it hurt my eyes. I opened the portfolio and pulled out the bill. I just had a few questions about the expenses. "They seem high this month." "Oh God, tell me about it. We are just hemorrhaging money trying to land this account. It's exhausting." I looked down at the paper. My own business account for the foundation, the one Arthur and I built from scratch, was filled with charges for catering for fundraisers, printing costs for donor packets, and bulk stamps from Costco. Theirs was different. Erewhon, I read aloud, $1,220. Erewhon was a grocery store in Los Angeles so expensive it made Whole Foods look like a bargain bin. Was this for a client dinner? Oh, that's just pantry stocking, Eleanor. We have to have the right kind of kombucha on hand if a client does drop by. You can't serve people Folgers and cheese doodles. It's about presence. I nodded slowly. And Soho House, the private club, $400 in membership dues. Networking, Eleanor. That's purely networking. Thomas ran into 3 major collectors there last week. Didn't you, honey? She called toward the office. The gunfire paused. Yeah, babe. Big stuff, he yelled back. And this charge, I continued, my finger tracing the line, from a designer, the row, $2,200, for client-facing attire. Chloe finally sighed, that sweet, patient sound. She sat across from me, her face a perfect mask of concern. Eleanor, I know this is different from how you and Arthur did business, but this is the modern art world. It's not about selling widgets, it's about access. Thomas has to look the part. He has to be at the right places. We can't have him showing up in, I don't know, a Men's Warehouse suit. It would be humiliating. The office door opened, and Thomas emerged, rubbing his eyes. He was in expensive-looking gray sweatpants and a t-shirt. He saw the bill on the counter, and his face soured. Mom, please, not this again. We're working on it. Thomas, I said, my voice quiet. The business has been open for 3 years. It hasn't logged a single dollar of income, not one. I'm not funding a business. I'm funding your life. I'd crossed a line. Chloe's face hardened just for a second before melting back into that practiced, worried expression. Eleanor, I'm a little shocked, she said, placing her hand on Thomas's arm. We talked about this. This is a long-term investment. This is Thomas's passion. Are you having financial trouble? Because if you are, you just need to tell us. We're just so worried about you managing the whole estate by yourself. All those numbers. It's a lot for one person to handle. Maybe it's time we stepped in to help you manage things. And there it was. The pivot. In 3 sentences, I went from a concerned investor to a confused old woman who couldn't read a balance sheet. She made it my problem. She made me the incompetent one, the one to be worried about. My son just nodded, looking relieved. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. She's right, Mom. Don't worry about it. We've got it under control. Big things are coming. Big things. I felt a familiar hot prickle of not anger, not yet. It was embarrassment. Embarrassment for him. Embarrassment for me. What could I say? He was my son, my only child, Arthur. Arthur always knew Thomas was soft-hearted. He's got your heart, Elle, he used to say, but my God, I hope he finds your spine. After Arthur passed, I think I made it my mission to shield Thomas from every sharp edge in the world, but in doing so, I just made him dull. I had protected him from responsibility. I folded the Amex statement and slid it back into my portfolio. Fine, but Thomas, we need to see some progress. Absolutely, Mom, you got it. He gave me a quick, empty hug that smelled like expensive soap, and I walked back to the main house, the bill still in my hand. The gilded guest house. I thought, that's what it was. A beautiful cage I had built and paid for, and they were the ones living inside it, complaining that the bars weren't gold-plated enough. I left them to their work. I walked out of their pristine glass box, my heels sinking slightly into the perfect, overwatered lawn. I crossed the 50 yards of sculpted garden that separated their world from mine and let myself into the main house. The silence was a relief. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to my sitting room. I went to Arthur's study. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The air inside was different. It always was. It smelled like old books, faint pipe tobacco, and worn leather, the smell of him. It was the one room in the entire 12,000-square-foot house that Chloe hadn't dared to help me with, yet. Sunlight cut through the old wooden blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing over the worn-out Persian rug. While their guest house was all white quartz and cold steel, this room was warm, paneled in mahogany, and cluttered with a life well lived. It was real. "It's a lot for one person to handle," she'd said. That sweet, concerned voice. My hand grazed the spines of a dozen worn, leather-bound books on contract law. My fingers traced the brass plaque on an award for excellence in philanthropic management. What Chloe and even my own son never understood, what I had allowed them to forget, was that I wasn't just Arthur Vance's widow, I was his partner. He was the brilliant architect, the dreamer who could see a skyline in a block of granite. I was the one who read the zoning laws. He designed the buildings. I secured the permits. He charmed the donors. I managed the endowment. I was the one who incorporated the Vance Foundation. I was the one who navigated the IRS 501c3 process. I was the one who, for the last 10 years, had managed the complex portfolio of stocks and real estate that paid for, well, everything, including her $1,000 kombucha. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. My fingers stopped on his favorite chair. It was a big, cracked, burgundy leather wingback. The stuffing was coming out of one arm, permanently imprinted with the shape of his body. It was worthless to an antique dealer. To me, it was a throne. I sank into it, the old leather groaning a familiar welcome sound. I closed my eyes, and for a second, he was right there. I was 30 again, not 65. We were bent over this very desk. Blueprints, not Amex statements, were scattered everywhere, littered with empty coffee cups. Arthur was pointing with his worn-down pencil, his voice rough with excitement. "This is the linchpin, Elle," he'd said, tapping the drawing. "The structural integrity. This foundation isn't just for a building, it's for a family. It has to be strong enough to last for generations. It has to bear the weight." I opened my eyes. The room was empty. The silence was heavy. He was right. A foundation had to be strong, but I was starting to realize that a foundation built on endless, unearned giving wasn't a foundation at all. It was quicksand. It was swallowing my son whole. And it was swallowing me with him. And that feeling of sinking, of being swallowed, only got worse after that day in the guest house. It was as if that gentle confrontation, that hint that the bank might close, had spooked Chloe. Not into backing off, but into doubling down. If I was incompetent, she would just have to take more control, for my own good. About a week later, I came down to my kitchen, the kitchen where I had taught Thomas to make scrambled eggs, where Arthur and I had danced to Sam Cooke on a Friday night, but it didn't smell right. It didn't smell like seasoned cast iron and old wood. It smelled metallic, like a hospital. I went to the stove to make my morning eggs. My pan was gone. The heavy, black cast iron skillet, the one my grandmother had given my mother, and my mother had given me, was gone. In its place, hanging from a new, sterile-looking rack, was a set of those trendy, non-stick ceramic pans. In seafoam green, I heard footsteps. Chloe breezed in, already in her yoga pants, holding a green juice. "Morning, Eleanor. Do you love them? I saw you struggling with those old black things the other day. They must have weighed 20 pounds. And honestly, they were probably toxic. Flaking, you know. These are so much lighter. So much more hygienic." I just stared at the empty hook where my pan had hung for 30 years. "Where is it, Chloe?" "Oh, I had the housekeeping staff donate them. Goodwill, I think. It's better this way, you'll see. So much easier for you to handle. Easier for me to handle." My grandmother's skillet. The one I had used to sear hundreds of steaks for Arthur, the one I had taught my son to cook in. Gone, because it was heavy and old. I picked up the new pan. It was light as air. It felt hollow. I placed it back on the rack. The little tink of it hitting the metal was the only protest I could muster. "Thank you, Chloe," I managed to say. That was very practical. Then, it was the garden. I woke up one morning not to birdsong but to the grinding roar of a wood chipper. I ran to my bedroom window, pulling my robe tight. There were 3 landscaping trucks parked on my gravel driveway, and a team of men was systematically tearing out Arthur's azalea bushes, the ones he had planted himself. I ran downstairs, my slippers flapping on the marble floor. Chloe was on the back terrace, pointing and directing, holding a large iced coffee like a scepter. "Chloe, what is going on?" She turned, startled, and then beamed, as if I'd caught her preparing a wonderful surprise. Eleanor, good, you're up. Isn't it fabulous? I hired a new landscape architect. That wild look you had was just so messy, so overgrown. We need clean lines, a modern look. It's so much better for everything. Arthur designed that garden, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He loved those azaleas. Oh, I know, but it was a jungle. We have to think about maintenance. And besides, she said, lowering her voice to a confidential, practical tone, this will do wonders for the resale value. A house this important needs curb appeal that matches. Resale value. Was I dead already? Was she just prepping the estate for sale? She was paving over his memory with fresh mulch and telling me it was an upgrade. I looked at my son, Thomas, who was standing off to the side, holding a rake, looking like he always did. Useless. Mom, it looks good, he offered, with all the conviction of a man trying to get back to his video games. It's cleaner. I just turned and walked back inside. The final straw, the one that really showed me just how far gone things were, was the 4th of July barbecue. This was my event. It was our event. For 25 years, Arthur and I had hosted the annual Vance Foundation barbecue. It wasn't just a party, it was a tradition. We hosted our board members, major donors, the mayor, the university president. It was the one time of year the main house felt like it was doing its job, bursting with life and purpose. This year, Chloe had insisted on helping with the invitations. Eleanor, please, she'd begged. You're still addressing envelopes by hand. It's madness. Let me handle the evites. It's all digital now. I can manage the entire guest list from my phone. You should be enjoying the party, not working it. That same tired phrase. You've earned a rest. So I let her. The day of the party, I walked out onto my back lawn, and I felt like a stranger. The music wasn't the classic jazz quartet I always hired. It was thumping, bass-heavy pop music I didn't recognize. The guest list. I didn't recognize half the people. They were young, dressed in designer labels, all holding the same pink-colored cocktail. The food. My God, the food. I had a local, family-owned barbecue joint that had catered this event for 2 decades. Their ribs were legendary. Chloe had dismissed them. So heavy. Eleanor. All that. Sauce. Instead, she had hired some trendy, expensive LA caterer. There were tiny pieces of avocado toast on little crackers. There was a deconstructed ceviche. There was nothing real. I was trying to find a familiar face when Marge Gable, one of our oldest donors, came up to me. Eleanor, she said, air-kissing me. So lovely to see you enjoying yourself. It's just wonderful what Chloe and Thomas are doing here. Such energy. They've really brought this old place back to life, haven't they? I must have looked confused. Pardon me, Marge. Oh, the Evite. So clever. It's just so wonderful of them to host you. You must be so proud. Host? Me? In my house? I felt my blood run cold. Marge, would you be a dear? My phone died. Could I possibly see that invitation? I never actually saw the final version. Of course, dear. She pulled out her phone and found the email. I took the phone from her hand. My own was perfectly fine in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so hard I was afraid I'd drop it. I read the text. In a crisp, elegant sans serif font, it said, Thomas and Chloe Vance request the pleasure of your company at the Vance estate for a summer celebration. My name was gone. I wasn't the host. I wasn't the co-host. I wasn't even mentioned. In the eyes of my entire community, I was just the old relative they were hosting at the party. I was the venue. I handed the phone back to Marge. How lovely, I said. My smile felt like it was cracking my face. I backed away, nodding, and walked straight back into the main house, the thumping music vibrating through the walls. She had taken my kitchen, she had paved over Arthur's garden, and now she had just publicly and politely erased me from my own life. There was only one place left to go, the only place that was still mine. I walked down the long, quiet hall to Arthur's study. I needed that sanctuary. I needed to sit in his chair and breathe in the smell of him and remember who I was. I reached for the brass doorknob, needing that one, last refuge. Surely, I thought, surely she would respect this. My hand was on the heavy, cool brass doorknob. I turned it, pushing the oak door open, expecting to be wrapped in the familiar, comforting scent of my husband's life. The smell hit me first. It wasn't Arthur. It wasn't old books, or leather, or the faint, sweet smell of the pipe tobacco he'd quit years before he passed, but that had still clung to the curtains. It was lemon, the sharp, sterile, chemical smell of an aggressive cleaning. I froze in the doorway. The room was gone. It wasn't a study. It was just an empty box. A 20 by 20 foot room with beige walls and a freshly vacuumed carpet. The afternoon sun, which used to cut through the blinds and illuminate the dancing dust motes, now just flooded the space, showing every empty corner. The heavy mahogany desk, the one we had leaned over, signing the papers for the foundation, was gone. The built-in bookshelves that lined 2 of the walls were stripped bare. Not a single book on contract law, not one volume of architectural history. The framed blueprints of his greatest achievements were gone from the walls. The old Persian rug was gone. All that was left were faint, rectangular indentations in the carpet, ghosts of where a life used to be. But my eyes were fixed on the corner by the window, the place where his big, cracked burgundy leather wingback chair had sat, the chair he died in, reading a book of poetry, the chair I had refused to move, refused to even reupholster, the chair I sat in when I needed to think, when I needed to feel. Him. It was gone. My hand, still on the doorknob, began to tremble. Just a little. A single, betraying tremor. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stopped. It felt as if all the air had been punched out of my lungs and then out of the entire world. The thumping, mindless bass of the party outside, her party, suddenly seemed deafening. It was a violation, a soundtrack to a desecration. She hadn't just cleaned. She hadn't reorganized. She had liquidated him. She had looked at this room, this sanctuary, this physical manifestation of a brilliant man's life, and saw clutter. She saw dead space. She saw a messy room that was bad for resale value. She had hired strangers to come into my house, into this room, and put price tags on his memories, and she had sold them. I stood there for a full minute, maybe 10. The music pulsed, thump, thump, thump. And in that silence, in that sterile, lemon-scented void, something inside me clicked. The hurt, the confusion, the deep, aching embarrassment I had been carrying for years. It didn't just fade. It evaporated. It was burned away by a sudden, cold, white-hot clarity. The long squeeze was over. The 15 years of my kindness, my enablement, my fear of being unloved. It all snapped. The weak, accommodating, lonely widow Chloe thought she was managing was gone. The woman who was left, standing in the ghost of her husband's study, was the same woman who had built an empire with him. The woman who read the fine print. The woman who understood, better than anyone, what a foundation was truly for. I felt my hand stop trembling. I let go of the doorknob. I smoothed the front of my dress. My face, I could feel, had settled into a mask. It was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. The compression phase was over. I turned from the empty doorway, my movements measured, not rushed. The thumping bass from the party outside seemed to fade, replaced by a sharp, clear ringing in my ears. Right on cue, Chloe came down the hall, fanning her face with a cocktail napkin. She saw me, then glanced into the empty room, and her face lit up with a brilliant, self-satisfied beam. "Oh good, you saw," she chirped, walking up to me. "Isn't it amazing? I can finally breathe in here." I just looked at her. I know, you've been putting it off," she continued, placing a confidential hand on my arm. "But honestly, Eleanor, it was just clutter. So much dead space. I hired an estate seller, one of the best. He works with all of Thomas's clients and he handled everything. So professional." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a wonderful secret bargain. "And you won't believe the wonderful price we got for that old chair. A wonderful price. For Arthur's chair, the place he took his last breath." I felt a smile, thin and cold, touch my own lips. It felt foreign, like a mask I had just found. I nodded, slowly. "You're right, Chloe," I said. My voice was even. It didn't waver. It didn't crack. It was as clean and empty as the room she'd just made. It is time to look forward, not back. I patted her hand, the one that was still on my arm. Thank you for making that so clear. I walked past her, leaving her smiling in the doorway of that bright, lemon-scented tomb. She thought she had finally won. She thought she had finally taken control. She had no idea what she had just set free. She had no idea what she had just set free. I walked right past her, back toward the thumping music of her party. The high-pitched laughter, the clinking glasses, the strangers on my lawn. It all sounded like static, like a radio station I was finally tuning out. No one noticed me. I was the ghost in my own home, the old woman who had earned a rest. I walked up the grand staircase, my hand on the smooth, polished wood, and I didn't look back. They could have their party. It was, after all, theirs. I had work to do. That night, long after the last caterer's truck had rumbled away and the lights in the gilded guest house were dark, the main house was silent. But one light was on. It wasn't in Arthur's study. That was a tomb. It was in my office, the real working office of the Vance Foundation, a room tucked away behind the library, a room of modern workstations and filing cabinets that Chloe didn't even know existed. She thought I was an emotional old woman who wrote checks. She forgot I was the one who managed the checks. I sat at my desk. Not the antique Arthur had loved, but my own solid, functional command center. I opened my laptop. The blue-white glow lit my face. Complex, she'd said. A lot for one person to handle. My fingers moved on the keyboard. First, the main foundation account. Login, admin, change password. Done. Security questions. Changed. Next, the private family trust account. The one that funded their lives. Login, admin, change password. Done. Next, the Amex account associated with the trust. The one with their names on it. User, Thomas Vance. Access, suspended. User, Chloe Vance. Access, revoked. I clicked the mouse. A small, precise, digital snip. It took less than 90 seconds. Then, I opened the secure digital vault on my hard drive. I pulled up the file. Vance Art Advisory, LLC. I scanned the incorporation documents. Just as I remembered. I was the sole registered agent and president. They were merely employees with signature privileges. I opened a new document. Articles of Dissolution. I typed in the date. I e-signed my name, Eleanor Vance, President. I filed it with the Secretary of State's online portal, paid the $50 fee, and received an automated confirmation. The business was liquidated, effective immediately. Just like Arthur's chair. A clean, modern look. So much more hygienic. My final act. I picked up my phone. It was 11:15 p.m. I knew my lawyer, David, would be awake. He, like Arthur, was a night owl. He picked up on the second ring. Eleanor? Is everything all right? David, I said. My voice was perfectly level. I'm making some administrative changes. I want to restructure the discretionary payouts from Arthur's trust. Halt them. All of them. There was a silence on the other end. A lawyer's pause. He had been Arthur's best friend. He knew. Eleanor, are you certain? I looked out the window, across the dark, manicured lawn to the guest house, a little glass box of ingratitude. They got a wonderful price for his chair, David. I've never been more certain in my life. I ended the call. I shut my laptop. The office was dark again. I sat there in the silence of a house that was finally, completely, mine. I slept that night. For the first time in years, I truly slept, deep and dreamless. I didn't wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if Thomas was okay. I didn't worry about Chloe's networking budget. I woke up to the sun, not to a sense of dread. I went to the kitchen. My kitchen. I pulled out my old, heavy French press, the one Chloe hated, and made myself a real cup of coffee. As I waited for it to brew, I allowed myself a small, grim fantasy. I pictured Chloe, pulling her white Range Rover into the Starbucks drive-thru for her $9 venti something or other. I saw her tapping her phone against the payment screen, and then that little polite electronic beep of denial, the confusion, the flash of irritation. Try it again, she'd snap at the barista. Beep, the annoyance turning to real anger. It must be your machine. Beep, The long line of cars behind her, the honking, the crushing, public humiliation. The first, tiny hairline crack in her perfect curated funded facade. And then I pictured my son, Thomas. He always gassed up the SUV on Wednesdays. He loved the Costco gas line. I suppose it made him feel responsible. I saw him in my mind's eye, sunglasses on, music playing, finally pulling up to the pump, waving the Amex card in front of the reader. Card not authorized. He'd frown. He'd try the debit card for the art advisory. Account closed. I pictured him, sitting there, looking in his wallet, the dawning cold panic, the sudden terrible realization that the magic tap had been turned off, that he was a 40-year-old man in a gas-guzzling car he hadn't paid for, with no way to buy a tank of gas. The man who was handling my complex affairs, suddenly unable to handle his own. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee. It tasted, for the first time in a very long time, perfect. I knew I wouldn't have to wait long. The performance was over. The real conversation was about to begin. And I didn't even have to wait for lunch. I was in the main sitting room, reading the Wall Street Journal, the real paper version, not the one on a screen. I heard the front door. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't a chime. It was a slam. The kind of slam a spoiled teenager uses when you take away his car keys, a sound of pure, unadulterated entitlement. I didn't get up. I just took a sip of my cooling coffee. They stormed in. They didn't walk. They stormed, like a summer squall. Chloe was in the lead, of course, her face a blotchy, furious red. Her usually perfect blonde bob was messy, as if she'd been pulling at it. Her mask of concerned serenity was gone, shattered. For the first time, she looked cheap. My son, Thomas, was right behind her, like a pilot fish attached to a shark. He looked like a 1-2-year-old, his face pale and sweaty. He was twisting his hands. "Mom, what's going on?" he yelled. His voice cracked with a panic that was almost comical. He didn't say hello, no preamble, just the raw animal fear of a teat being withdrawn. I slowly folded my newspaper. I set it deliberately on the ottoman. Chloe's card was declined, he blurted out, as if this was a global catastrophe. At Starbucks. And then at the pump. The Costco card is dead. Chloe finally found her voice. It wasn't the sweet, soft, flute-like instrument she usually used. It was a shriek. "The accounts are empty. The business account is gone. What did you do?" Thomas, bless his heart, found the most pathetic line of all. "Chloe can't even buy groceries." I noted the phrasing. Not, "we, Chloe." His first thought was for his wife, the one who had so thoroughly neutered him. I had been waiting for this moment, in one form or another, for 5 years. For years I had dreaded it, rehearsed it, flinched from it. But now, as I looked at these two panicked, spoiled adults standing on my Persian rug, all I felt was a profound, cold calm. "Mom, did you hear me?" I looked only at my son. I made a point of ignoring her completely. "Thomas," I said, my voice as quiet and level as a frozen lake, "your allowance is gone. The Vance Art Advisory, the company that I owned, and that you were an employee of, has been dissolved." Chloe let out a sound like a kettle boiling. You can't. We have an agreement. We manage this family. We've been helping you. We've been taking care of you." Ah, there it was. The script. The one she used when she thought I was a doddering, incompetent old fool who needed handling. "You need us," she finally spat out. I finally turned my head, just slightly, to look at her. I let my eyes travel from her messy hair to her enraged, blotchy face, down to her $800 yoga pants. I looked at her, dead in the eye. "You didn't help me, Chloe," I said. The dialogue economy was in full effect. Every word was a bullet. "You erased me." She recoiled, as if I'd slapped her. I leaned forward, just an inch. You sold my husband's memory for a wonderful price." This was the moment, the pin dropping, the record scratch, the blood drained from Chloe's face. She knew, instantly, what I was talking about. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. But Thomas's head snapped back and forth between us. The panic on his face was replaced by a deep, genuine confusion. He looked truly stunned. "What?" he said, his voice small. "Sold? What does she mean, Chloe?" He turned fully to his wife, his eyes wide. Chloe, you sold his study. He didn't know. The pathetic, tragic, beautiful truth of it hit me. He was weak, parasitic, and pathologically lazy, but this, he hadn't known. He was just the getaway driver. She was the one who pulled the trigger. He had let her pave over the garden, let her take over the parties, let her manage his life, but he would not have let her sell that room. And she knew it. Which is why she did it without telling him. I turned my attention back to Thomas. This part was for him, and him alone. I have enabled you, Thomas, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Not with pity, but with resolve. For your entire adult life, I was so afraid of you failing that I never gave you a chance to succeed. I was so worried about you getting hurt that I built you a golden cage and handed you the key. That was my mistake. He just stared at me, his mouth open. And this, I said, gesturing to the empty air between us, is my lesson. The lesson your father always tried to teach you, and that I was too weak to enforce. I stood up. Your discretionary trust fund, the one your father set up for you and your children, is frozen. The guest house is being sold. Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. Sold. You're kicking us out. You can't. That's our home. It was my guest house, I said, my voice hard again. You have 30 days. You are both healthy, educated adults. You will find jobs. You will find an apartment you can afford. You will learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I walked past them, toward the door. It is time, I said, pausing to look back at my 40-year-old son, for you to finally understand what your father's work was all about. Building something, not just living in it. I left them standing there in the grand foyer, their faces a mask of white-hot panic. I didn't wait for the screaming, the begging, or the inevitable negotiations. I just closed the door to my library and let the silence settle. That was 3 months ago. Today, I'm not in that grand, echoing main house. I sold it, all 12,000 square feet of it, along with the gilded guest house and the paved-over garden. The resale value was, as Chloe had predicted, excellent. I now live in a bright, modern condo downtown. All glass and light, overlooking the park. The air, 18 floors up, feels clearer. And in the sunniest corner, by the floor-to-ceiling window, sits a familiar, cracked, burgundy leather wingback chair. It took my lawyer 2 weeks to track it down. The estate seller Chloe had hired had sold it to a vintage shop in the city for a paltry sum. I paid 10 times that to buy it back. It's the only old thing in this whole apartment. It's not a relic in a tomb anymore. It's just Arthur's chair. And it's where I drink my coffee. My laptop was open on the table. My granddaughter Sophie was beaming at me from her dorm room at college. And so I got an A on the poli-sci midterm. Professor Hadley said my thesis on regulatory capture was one of the best in the class. That's my girl, I said, and my chest swelled with a clean, uncomplicated pride. That's your grandfather shining through. He loved a good argument against a lazy system. Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for the, I knew. The real Vance Trust, the one Arthur and I had structured, ironclad, for our grandchildren's education, was paying her tuition, directly. There was no middleman. No art advisory skimming off the top to fund a lifestyle, just a foundation doing its job. You earned it, sweetheart, I said. Now, tell me about this roommate. As she launched into a very funny story about a boy and a laundry mishap, my phone vibrated on the table. A text from a number I hadn't seen in months. My son. My heart didn't pound. It didn't seize. I just looked at it. The message was short. Mom, got a job. At the local high school, teaching art. I watched the little gray bubble appear and disappear as he typed and retyped. It's not much. The pay is terrible. Another long pause. Chloe is working as a paralegal. She's actually good at it. We're in a 2-bedroom apartment over by the freeway. You can hear the traffic. I waited. I knew what this was. This was the hard part. But it's mine. I got my first paycheck last week. I framed it. It felt real. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I'm sorry I let you down. I'm sorry I let her. The message stopped, but it was enough. I looked up at Sophie, still chatting happily on the screen. I looked out the window at the park, green and alive. I looked at Arthur's chair, sitting in the sun, and I smiled. A real smile, one that reached my eyes. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge, it was peace. I hadn't just gotten my life back. I had, finally, after all these years, given my son a chance to start his. He was 40 years old, in a small apartment by a freeway, and he was, at long last, building something. He was building his own foundation. And I had finally, stopped being the quicksand that was swallowing him whole. For so many years, I thought I was being a good mother. I really did. I thought my job was to protect him, to provide for him, to make his life easy. But I wasn't being a mother. I was just being a bank. A very accommodating, very lonely, and very blind bank. I was so afraid of my son failing, so terrified he would get hurt by the world, that I never, ever gave him a chance to succeed. My help wasn't help at all. It was a poison. A comfortable, slow-acting poison called enablement, and it was crippling his soul. Selling that house, freezing those accounts. It wasn't revenge for a sold chair. Not really. That was just the wake-up call. The real act, the hardest thing I've ever done, was finally letting go. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to stop being kind and start being right. It's to force them to build their own foundation, even if they have to start with nothing but a paycheck they framed. So let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Between being the person everyone wanted you to be and the person you needed to be? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.